Okay, so this is just a tutorial on how to draw animals. If you ever see any kids, they draw them like this sometimes. And while that's not a bad thing, it's not really accurate. So I'm going to try to show you some tips on how to get them to draw them a little bit more accurately. Key thing is details. Get them to look and see like what's different. So for example, here we're adding a little bit more thickness to it. And it still doesn't look right, so we gotta keep changing it, keep modifying it. That's a really good way to teach kids how to make their drawings a little bit more accurate, is just ask them what's different, or what did you do that's like not the same, or something similar to that, and then just get them to look at those things, and that will help them make it a little better. Still a little awkward, but it's better than what it was before, and that's what shows you progress. Skeletons is usually what I have them first start with. And so they'll find a picture of a skeleton, and then what they're going to do is they're going to reduce it to just the simplest of shapes. Simplification will really help them out. Sometimes they do this, and I'm like, no. And I try to make sure that they're looking at the angle and the curve of the line. And whenever they go to do that, sometimes I have them trace it first, and that will really, really help them out. So right here I'm showing them that like if you draw a shape for the shoulder and hip bones first, and then draw the joints for the legs, it will help out a lot more. For the front legs, you just got kind of this like simple line. But for the back leg, you got this kind of a lightning bolt effect. And I usually always tell my kids, draw a lightning bolt for the back leg, because that's kind of a little bit more how the joints go, because they have much, much thicker thighs. And if they just kind of draw this straighter line like they do for the front leg, then sometimes it doesn't really work out as well. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to pose them. If you can figure out how to draw the skeleton, then you can draw in any pose that you want. Just think of how you can bend and stretch the poses. So for example, here I am starting with the head down at the bottom and bending the back so it looks like it's stretched out. Thinking about where does the shoulders go on the spine and where does the back leg go on the spine. And then adding the hips and shoulders and then adding the lines from there. Just keeping with that lightning bolt foot of the back. And there is kind of like a curvy bend, like maybe he's getting ready to pounce. Here's a little bit more of a dynamic look, kind of a little awkward, but we got that lightning bolt back leg. We got kind of like the arm is kind of like bent up a little bit more, still following and being true to the joints. So that way we're not too far off, but we're just stretching and bending them, thinking about how does the actual animal bend. All right, whenever you have mastered the skeleton, and you can practice on that for a couple days or however long that you need to, or a couple hours. Whenever you master the skeleton, try to apply it to different poses of like actual references. And after you get the handle of that, and then you're going to be working with more basic shapes. Here what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the look of it correct first before I do basic shapes though. If you start with just a simple line, it's so much easier to erase and change a line than it is to change a whole bunch of details like the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the shapes, the ears. It's hard that way. So if I see a kid draw the line art wrong, I'm not going to be like, oh, that's good enough. I'm going to tell them, no, you need to do that again because you did not do it correctly. And sometimes that'll make them get frustrated, but I'm like, no, if you're going to do it right. And so try to convince them that, yes, even though this does look good, I want you to do it the way that the picture is or the way that it should be. That way they know that you're serious and they know that you want them to draw from observation. So here you can see like where I've had to erase it several times because I was just kind of drawing it too quickly. And so here the neck is too far down, so I'll erase it and then I'll make it more angled up. Then it's too far up, then I'll erase it and make it more angled down. So oftentimes I'll show, like sometimes I'll purposely show kids mistakes like this so that they know that, hey, even a person that can draw is going to make a lot of mistakes, so it's okay if they make them too. So it's very important that you encourage them, like, and a mistake is not a bad thing. A mistake is a great thing because you can learn from that mistake. So once you have achieved the look of your skeleton, then you're ready for the basic shapes. Don't let them, well, you can, of course, but I usually don't let them move on until they've mastered this step. Once they've mastered this step, it's on to the basic shapes. And the basic shapes are going to be things like circles, squares, triangles, all these things. Now when doing a basic shape, I tell them, pretend that the fur is gone, or the feathers are gone, or the scales are gone. Pretend that it has no eyes, it has no ears, has no mouth, has no anything at all except for the very, very basic shapes of what the animal is made of. So here we're looking at, we have the square, the triangle, the circle, the rectangle. You can do more complicated shapes if you're at an upper level, like a trapezoid, or you can even combine shapes like a circle for the head and a square for the muzzle. And if you're really upper level, you can use forms like spheres and like cubes and things. So depending on what level you're teaching or what level you're trying to learn from, start with the basics and then build up. Don't try to skip over. All right, so we have 4 different things that I usually have them draw before they do any details. As I say, draw the very basic shape of the head, the body, the legs, and the neck. So here we are experimenting with the head shape. So this would be kind of like the rectangular shape or maybe the trapezoid shape. If you're combining the shapes, think of the skull like you have the cranium and you have the jaw. So thinking about how is that different, how is that similar. Whenever you have kind of like gotten the concept of how to draw the head, then you can apply it to the actual skeleton frame. Like I said, or I don't know if I said it before, but have a reference. References help so much. So for right here, because I have a photo, I can measure how many heads go in the body. Typically there's going to be about 2. And so I'll tell the kids, make sure that you drew the head small enough to where you can fit 2 in the body, or draw it big enough to where you can fit 2 in the body. So here I am experimenting with different body shapes. So I see that this one's kind of like a, maybe like a potato-y shape, or a, I don't know, whatever kind of shape that is, a curvy shape. If you're more advanced, or I even use this sometimes for my younger kids because it helps them a little bit more, is draw like a sphere for the rib cage and a sphere for the hip bones, and then connect them together. It'll often look like a bean shape, but that's kind of something that kids actually kind of get, especially because they love eating jelly beans nowadays. I don't know why. And anyway, and so you're thinking about how the neck is connected whenever you're done with the body. A lot of kids will try to do like really skinny necks. I'm like, no. So I tell them, like, look at where is the neck connected. It's connected at the bottom of the jaw, and then it connects down to the torso. And then you look at the back of the head, it's connected behind the ears, and it connects down to the shoulder, and it's connected with a curve, not a really, really sharp angle. And so trying to get them to use those softer lines. When you go to the legs, you have to think they're not connected on the bottom of the body. A lot of kids will try to do that. I'm like, no. Look and see where they connected at. If you need to, draw on a reference photo, and that can help you. And so once they have kind of grasped where it's connected, then they can just draw parallel lines for their legs. For most cases, not all cases, just most cases, you can draw kind of a parallel line and just make some parts thicker, some parts thinner, taking into account the muscle structure. With my older kids, I make them look at muscle structures, like actual legitimate muscles, and it helps them out so much. With the back legs, this is where that lightning bolt comes into play, is that you have the ankle. That lightning bolt really pushes them for the ankle. And then for the back area, you have the thigh makes up the rear. A lot of times kids will do this. They'll draw like this really beautiful animal. They'll even have like this little curvy tail, but they're like the foot. And then there's this awkward thing that sticks out the back. I don't know why they do that. I tell them, remember that your thigh is your butt. So the thigh is going to curve all the way up to the spine, down to that ankle. When you add the tail, remember that is also an extension of the spine. So whenever they add it, make sure they don't add it too low or too high, so that they get their shapes the way they want them. Now you can apply all these basic shapes to the skeleton forms that you made earlier, and it can help you out for the practice run. And it's okay if these aren't perfect. The anatomy might be wrong, the legs might be too short or too long, or maybe the head's like freakishly large. Just that if you notice your kids doing that, or if you notice yourself doing that, just correct yourself when you get there. But if you're just practicing, it's okay to make a couple mistakes. It's okay for it to look a little silly. And I know that some kids are very much like perfectionists. Make sure that you emphasize that it's okay for you to be wrong. It's okay for you to have it a little bit rough or a little bit sketchy, because that's one of the easiest ways to learn, is to not necessarily be perfect about it. Just be willing to make those mistakes as you go, and it'll turn out okay. Let them be okay with making those kinds of things. So right here, I'm just continuing to add more and more different things. Like, you can say that like the head's too small on this one, but I'm not changing it because this is just a practice exercise. So it's good. All right. So once you have mastered the head, the body, the legs, and the neck, and you figured out how to connect them, and you're looking at those things like ankle joints and stuff, you can try to, once you've mastered side view. Now notice that so far I've been using mostly side view. I suggest using lower elementary levels with side view, and then when you get to upper grade levels, use the frontal view and the 3/4 turn. So here's a frontal view, and notice that like I'm checking the sizes, I'm checking the angles. Like right here we see these indentions. We're looking and seeing like how big is the head compared to the body, and then I'm doing a very, very rough sketch. Whenever you get to those upper skill levels, do those rougher sketches, and that can help them out with like just the planning and the posing. So right here what I'm going to do is I'm measuring, like I see that there's a flat line connecting the chest to the bottom of the thigh, so I'm having to change my image. If you can get kids to sketch first before doing a full-on drawing, it's so much easier to fix it. Like if I had already done all the fur and all the details before I got to this part, that would have been a total pain to have to fix. So here I'm looking, and I notice that it's a lot like human faces. The ears are kind of lined up with the eyes, and the nose goes in between the eyes, and it fits very nicely. So if you've taught your kids, or if you've ever learned human anatomy, it's really not that far off from animals. Okay, now whenever you finish kind of like understanding the basic shapes and the basic like form of the body, then if you have a upper skill level kid, then they can start doing actual poses on their own. And this does take a lot of practice, and this is nowhere near perfect, but here you can see I'm just taking like some basic forms and I'm moving them around, constantly changing my mind, trying to decide what it is that I'm wanting to go for. And kids can have a lot of fun with this because they can do any pose that they want, even if it's not really a believable pose. Like this one kind of looks like I don't even know, maybe it's dancing or awkward jumping. I don't know. But trying to get the look and the motion of it before you move on to the details can really, really help the kids out. So encouraging them to sketch before you detail can save them a lot of stress and a lot of worry later on. And whenever you do get that sketch in and you're ready for the detail, then you know exactly where to put your lines. And this has just saved me personally so much aggravation for later whenever I have to erase like a whole part in order to get it done. So here you can see I'm just like sketching it. It looks very awkward, but it's fun. And I think that's one of the most important parts about art is just have fun with what you're making, even if what you made was a little silly. Alright, so all these concepts can be applied to different animals. If you're looking at the shapes of different animals, just kind of compare them to previous animals that you've learned how to draw. Like cats are more kind of lean compared to dogs. They're a lot thinner and they have like more elongated features. Their heads are a little bit maybe more square-like rather than circle-like, but it's kind of all the same concept. No matter what it is that you're drawing, you're kind of just looking at what you're seeing. And that's a huge part of just drawing in general, is that draw from observation means that you're looking and not just drawing out of your head. So, and that's a very hard thing to break kids of, because they'll want to draw what they think it looks like and not what it actually looks like. So here you can see I'm having to change a little bit as I'm going along, and eventually you get that basic form. Now, when you come to something like a snake, a lot of times I get this. I'm like, no, kid, no. So you tell them, like, make sure that you're comparing it to the skeleton. What would that look like? What kind of curve would it make? And this is a pretty accurate curve, but then sometimes kids just kind of rush it afterwards. Like, they do pretty good on this basic shape, and then they kind of, or the basic structure, and they kind of rush through the basic shapes wanting to get it done. Encourage them to go slow. Take their time whenever they're going to draw it. So, looking for parallel lines. Looking for different shapes. Like, this is pretty okay, but it's not 100% accurate. Look for those negative empty spaces, like in between the coil of the body, and looking and seeing how far in does the curve go inside, especially if you're looking at something like a snake. Oh my gosh, snakes can be really complicated to draw for some different skill levels, but if you can just break them down, like, pretend like you're playing connect the dots. Like, try to find out where do the different parts of the body stop, where do they end, and then, like, try to understand those types of things. So here you can see that I'm noticing that the front part of the body is in front, and that it stops kind of about halfway in, and that there's going to be this little triangle of negative space on the inside. And notice that I made another mistake. Show kids that it's okay to make mistakes. Like, make them on purpose if you need to, but tell them it's okay to make a mistake. And if you do, all you have to do is fix it. So here you can see, trying to make sure that it lines up, make sure that it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense when you're drawing it and you look at it and you're like, that looks off, don't let them settle for just okay. Make sure that you tell them, keep going, keep making it better, keep doing your best. And then whenever they get those basic shapes done, then they can start looking for those details. Here you can see I've got the brow of the eye, and I'm starting to work on the mouth of the, like, snake. And then you can keep elaborating it from there, and all it takes is just looking. You're just looking and trying to copy it best you can. Now, some animals don't really have a neck, so this is kind of going to be a little bit awkward, especially if you're kind of doing the 4 basics of the head, neck, body, and legs. So instead of having them just draw it like this, because the head's not quite really attached, it's like got that awkward gap, and a lot of times kids will forget to fill in that gap. So what I have them do, instead of just like touching shapes, is I have them overlap the shapes. So once you get the shape of the head, then get the shape of the body and actually have it like go inside of the previous shape. And this one might get kind of more advanced students, but I think the younger ones can handle it too, as long as you just be patient with them. And then looking and seeing, how do those shapes overlap? Like, which parts come out of which areas, and like, where is it going, more or less. It's just all about observation, all about looking at it. Alright, so here you can see I'm just adding smaller details, and I notice that most of the time I'm waiting for those tiny details until after I have finished the sketch. And now, that's not necessarily the only way to draw, that's just my favorite way to draw, because I don't like to have to redo things over and over, and I'm sure a lot of your kids can relate to that. Alright, so just make sure that you're getting those overlaps in the correct location and changing things as you go. When you have something that's awkward like an elephant, they have like really big bodies compared to their heads, and like they have such a long trunk, so that can be kind of confusing for kids. Just tell them, just look at the shape. If you can take away all those details, look at just the shape. Simplify, simplify, simplify as much as you possibly can, and then draw it. And then after you finish simplifying it, then you can go back and make it more complicated. So here you can see I'm just drawing just basic shapes. Looks really awkward, looks very, very cartoony. That is okay. And then some kids don't like to do the skeleton step, but as you can see here, I'm having like a hard time without drawing that skeleton step. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to draw in the skeleton. Not all kids will find this as easier. Some kids will be like, wow, the skeleton step is so confusing. Allow them to do whatever feels more comfortable for them. For me personally, I have a much easier time if I draw out that skeleton, just because that's how I learned how to draw, or that's how I taught myself how to draw, and it makes it easier for me. Allow them to do what is that's easiest for them, but encourage them to try out different techniques, because sometimes they'll refuse to try out different ones, and it'll make it harder for them in the long run. So let them be comfortable, but also encourage them to try new things, and just keep going at it. Encourage them to keep going and don't stop, because whenever they stop drawing and whenever they lose that inspiration or that oomph to draw, then that's whenever they just don't move forward anymore. So make sure that they're doing all right. Horses, I hate kids asking me how to draw a horse, because they're so complicated in their bone structure of their legs. The torso and the head and all that's not too complicated, but their legs have like this extra joint, so it's like they're standing on like their very tiptoes compared to other animals. So whenever they are asking for something like this that's complicated, break it down into the simplest lines and the simplest shapes possible. So here you can see I added the shoulder muscle, because if you ever looked at a horse closely, they have like massive shoulder muscles in their torsos, and then trying to figure out how does those lines bend, how does that leg bend. So here you can see it looks very complicated, but if you tell them just think about what part is what, so you have like the different joints and the different muscles, and try to get them to think about what part is this in relation to you. This would be like their shoulder or their thigh or their ankle or their kneecap, or whenever you get this extra bit like digit, that'd be with your fingertip and stuff. So if they can compare it to something else, then that can really help them out whenever they're drawing. So whatever is simplest for them, make it to where you can explain it. And here we go on to like the giraffe. I have a lot of kids ask me for a giraffe for some reason. We're not even like, I don't know. It's just cute though. So just tell them, what's the shape? How long is the shape? Compare that length to another shape. Like if you measure out how long is the neck compared to the body, or how long is the legs compared to the whole thing, then I notice that the legs are about the same length as the neck. So whenever I go to draw it, I'm going to tell them, or whenever I'm going to show them how to draw, I'm going to tell them, make sure that you make your legs long enough. If they're not long enough, then it's not going to work out very well for you. So here we have this beautifully drawn giraffe, but like tell them it's okay to make it look silly at first, because it's going to look silly with those basic shapes. And then those basic shapes just give you, where do I put my next line? How long do I make this? Because if you don't have those basic shapes, you're going to have to kind of eyeball it. And some kids are awesome at that. If they're good at that and they have no problems, let them do it. Don't force them to do basic shapes. Just because another artist does it doesn't mean that all artists have to. And that can help out some and it can hinder some. So, like I said, let them be themselves. When you have something with horns for some reason, I guess they fit a sphere in them. Which I never noticed that until someone asked me to draw a deer. And I'm like, oh dude, that's so cool. So whenever I teach kids how to draw horns, and this works for not just deer, but for like if you're asked how to draw like a dragon or something, and you're trying to draw them like deer style antlers, you can show them how to add it to it. Now, of course, there's a difference in like ram horns and like a variety of horns. There's some different styles and techniques. But whenever you're going to draw kind of like a deer type of horn, then it's going to be kind of curving around a circle. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have my kids actually draw a circle first, and then have them draw on the horns. So right here you can see I'm just like roughing in the basic shapes of the body, fixing and editing as I go, and making sure that you're comparing how wide is the legs. And notice I added a tail poof. Like if the kids want to do something different from the picture, let them do it. Or like as long as it's not like super dramatic. I mean, I like the tail sticking up, but I mean that's up to the kid. So here you can see where I'm making the horns kind of curve around that sphere. that helps out so incredibly much. I used to have such a struggle. So now there's a pretty simple way of drawing horns. Sharks and anything that has something that is pointing towards you can be difficult. So there's not really the head, neck, and legs rule because it's all just kind of like a big body. I tell my kids, if you can draw a smiley face and a frowny face and a stick figure, you can draw anything. So here you can see that I'm kind of trying to figure out the angle of the line. I notice that from head to, or from like the very tip of the nose down to the tail, it's like a big long frowny face. And then I see that the bottom has kind of like a frowny face and a smiley face, with more so the smiley face. And I tell my kids, just keep working on the angle, see until you can get it right. So the one that finally worked for me is I did the slight frowny face off in the back of the tail, and then I did the smiley face for the belly up to the nose. And then the rest of it's all about just adding detail, figuring out where is the location of parts next to others. Foreshortening. Tell the kids, look at the shape. So here you can see that fin that's coming up towards us. It looks like an awkward oval. Something that I tell my kids whenever it comes to foreshortening is I have them point their finger to the side in front of their face like this. And then I tell them, look at the length of the finger. And then I tell them, turn your hand towards you so that you are pointing towards yourself. And a lot of times they'll like try to like stick the fingers in their faces. So I'm like, no, seriously, take it seriously. So then whenever they point their fingers towards themselves, they notice that their finger becomes a nub like this. And they're like, oh, that's so cool. And so that can really help them out sometimes. So teaching foreshortening, just compare the finger and that helps them out. When it comes to like learning how to draw like the basics, have them look at character reference sheets or like animal reference sheets and have them look at detail shots like the hooves or the ears, looking at those shapes, looking at the techniques that you could use in order to create those looks, like the bumps, the curves, the cheekbones. When they get to those small detail stages and whenever they're really working hard on getting the last minute ideas, look at pictures. References save your life so much. All right, now moving on to adding a texture. I show my 5th graders this Z line. I tell them to draw a zigzag line and then pretend that wind is blowing on the zigzag line, and so then they're going to draw it curvy. Now, when you pretend that the wind is blowing like crazy, it's going to be like really crazy curvy, and that's the Z line. And I use this line for fur and for grass and hair and anything like that. How to apply it to the Z line, you'd have like maybe for applying like fur, and you have to think about the direction that it's going. Now, before we get too much into the Z-line, let's look at how you can like take some things that you've learned. So this is for like an upper skill level, is that if you know how to draw basic shapes, so here we're starting off with like a doggish body. If you know the basic shapes, then you can draw and combine different types of creatures. So here we have like a dog body with maybe we're going to add wings, or kind of cliche maybe, so we're going to add wings. Yeah, there we go. So now we've added wings to our dog body, and we're like, it's not creative enough, so let's make this fin like it's a fish fin. Yeah, like a Pokemon, I don't know. And then maybe the front claws are birds. This is going to get awkward. But oh well, it's art, so it's fun. So encourage the kids, like, come up with your own character design. Come up with your own creature. Like, once they have mastered how to draw animals, and if they get bored with that, tell them, like, branch out. What else can you create with your artwork? Can you make your own animal? Can you create something that no one else has ever created before? I mean, they might come up with something really, really weird, but even if it is very odd, just tell them, like, hey, wow, that's cool, and that encourages them to keep doing that. I have some students that they create the weirdest, most unusual things, but I absolutely love it because it shows their creativity. So allowing the kids to show that creativity can really help them, like, want to be an artist or want to create things, and like actually find joy in creating art, because sometimes whenever you just have them just draw from reference nonstop, they can find it's very, very boring. So allow them to be silly, even if what they end up with is odd like this. But I mean, hey, I had lots of fun, so it's okay. Alright, so the Z line, how to apply it. I tell my kids that think of your pets. If you have one, think of a cat. If you pet your cat like normal, usually you're petting from like the head to the back, and then that's like the direction the fur grows. If you pet your kid backwards, though, your cat's probably going to scratch you. So I tell them, think about the fur direction and what direction it grows when you're going to add fur details. So here you can see that I'm going to start doing that Z line. I'm going to make sure that it's going in the direction that the fur grows. Especially, like, I teach my 6th graders, and I'm really, really hard on my 6th graders. Like, you really gotta look at that. And so we look at several different references. We look at several images. And when we go to draw it, I make sure that they're drawing it in the correct direction. And if it's not, then I tell them, you got to redo it. Sometimes they get really frustrated, but keep on them until they actually look at that direction. And so here you can see like it telling them that you can think of the direction, like does it change at all? Like if the body gets moved, like here the hand is pushing the fur up because the hand is lifted or paw. And using different types of line. Here we got some swirly fur lines for like a curlier fur texture. It doesn't have to be zigzag. Now, another thing kids will do is they'll add a lot of fur. And I'm like, you got it. It's going in the right direction, but it looks kind of like a porcupine, or it looks just a little bit too excessive. So I encourage them, like, don't go too far. Just do a little bit, just enough to give it a fur pop. And if you tell them just like kind of space it out, do it in just the shadowy areas, or do it just every now and then, do just like a couple lines, do a couple Z lines, and whenever you're done, it'll still look fluffy. You're still going to have a really fluffy, cute, or cool looking image, but it's not overboard. If you go too far with the detail, then it can be distracting. That doesn't work. That's not necessarily the same on all images, but unless you're going for like a hyper realistic picture where you got like really close zoomed in, you're probably not going to see that detail. You're probably just going to see just the basics and the roughs. Alright, so like just getting them to look at tiny details. Like here we're going to add whiskers, because like this is supposed to be a dog, but they're looking like a cat. So I'm like, it's just a dog. It's a cute animal. It's just a cute animal. So getting them to add those smaller details. So they can go more detailed. Just tell them don't go overboard unless like it's necessary. Okay, so now I'm just going to recap, as I'm just going to be like showing you some couple weird little doodles and stuff. So here we have how like I had a 5th grader. She started like this, and I got her to develop it, and she started drawing them kind of like this, to where she was looking at those shapes. She was getting that lightning bolt look for the tail, or sorry, not for the tail, for the foot, and that really, really helped her out. So then she started drawing all of her dogs like this, and I was like, that's a lot better. But then she kept drawing them exactly like that. I'm like, you can move it, you can bend it. And she's like, really? I'm like, yes, you can. And so she started to draw it in different poses. I helped her, I showed her how you can bend the legs, how you can bend and warp the body. So even though she's in 5th grade, she's now starting to draw her dogs kind of like this. So she's getting better. She's developing a skill. She's looking at overlap. She's thinking of how things can be moved. Now, she's still at this bottom stage, but what I'm hoping is that soon she's going to start getting at that more 3-dimensional stage. Now, that will take some practice and that will take some time. Don't expect your kids to get it right away. Allow them time to develop. But I do have some, now I have a, what grade is he in? 7th grade? Yeah. I have a 7th grader that he is now drawing different things like rhinos. And he's drawing them with cubes. And I'm like, oh, dude, that's so cool. So he can get these weird perspectives. And this applies for like a lot of animals, like turtles. Tell them what basic shapes. Where do they overlap? Overlap is kind of hard for kids to get whenever they're thinking of animals, because they'll want to draw them out to the side and it'll look like you're getting an aerial view. Make sure you tell them, like, especially if they're using a reference, always help them. Like, it helps so much if you use a reference. So getting them to just look at the images. Now, if they're wanting to make up the image, tell them to get inspiration. So here we're drawing a dragon inspired by a snake-like design that we drew earlier, and adding some of those different details that make up the dragon. Now, a lot of this I am drawing out of my head, and it's just because I've drawn a lot, like, kind of, like, I draw all the time. So, and I tell my kids that. I tell them, like, I draw, like, 20 times a day, if not, then at least 20 minutes a day or 2 hours a day, depending on if I have enough time. And I honestly try to do that, because I want to be able to show my kids how to do things. I want to show them how to draw weird things. Like, I think it was, like, last year or something, I didn't know how to draw a squirrel. So I practiced it, and I was able to actually show the kid how to draw the squirrel. And I felt really good about that, and it just helped a lot. So trying to learn stuff, be an active learner. Don't just have your kids learn, you learn as well. Now, this also applies to Pokemon. I know a lot of kids are obsessed with Pokemon, or even cartoon shows. Tell them to think about the anatomy of the animal, draw the basic shapes, and they can draw in any pose they want. So here is a Pikachu. He has that same lightning bolt leg that an animal does, because he's based off of animal anatomy. So even if the kids don't like animals, if they like stuff like Pokemon, get them to draw it. When you get to an extremely advanced student and they understand and they have mastered it, try to get them to do complicated poses. Like, this has a lot of foreshortening in it. It's jumping towards you. This one right here is a Razorback. If you can't get a kid to get interested in art, get them to draw their favorite mascot from their sports team, and they will become interested in art, because they will be the cool kid that is drawing the coolest mascot. Okay, so I think I've talked long enough, so I'm gonna go ahead and wind this down. So just get the kids to look at it when they're drawing, get them to draw from an observation, tell them it's not cheating, it's good for you, and that drawing from observation can really, really help you learn, and trying to get them to look at those basic shapes. Simplify it first. Be okay with scribbling. Be okay with making changes, making mistakes. It's all perfectly fine when you're learning. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helped. Feel free to contact me if you need any help or advice, or if you want me to show you how to draw a very specific animal. Alright, thanks. Goodbye.